You know that thing, whistle while you work? I think I've been beetling while I work. Working from home is fine, but you can get distracted. So I've been having a look at controversy revolving surrounding the Beatles, and I thought, is there anything out there that kind of lists anything controversial about the Beatles? So here are 10 that I found, and it's lunch break. Everyone's entitled to lunch, right? So I'll open this for discussion. Let's be friendly. I'm going to list 10 points that I found and see, are they controversial or not? And perhaps you'll leave a comment. Number 1, the breakup. The Beatles breaking up in 1970 caused disappointment and controversy among fans who wanted them to continue making music together. I think it was a natural progression that they started as a rock and roll band and they had a goal in mind. Now, did I read somewhere that they thought, if we get a year or two out of this, then we'll have had a good run? Who knew what the legacy would be, right? So it's understandable that after 8 years of making 13 albums, people would want them to continue. And there is talk that the Beatles could have continued as the Beatles but pursued solo careers, so release solo albums but then come back and do the occasional Beatles album, and that I think would have satisfied a lot of people. But as we know, there was a lot of conflict going on at the end, and the artistic directions that they were taking just wouldn't work with them being together. So while people would have been disappointed about not having them continue, I think it was a natural progression. So is that controversial? Probably not. The involvement of John's wife Yoko Ono in the band's affairs is a subject for controversy, with some blaming her for contributing to their breakup. I think it kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? Yoko was a strong woman. John was attracted to strong women. And I have a funny feeling that, when you think of Aunt Mimi and Julia, and I guess Yoko coming into the fore in that respect, anything that they would say, John would just go along with the flow. So, all his funny quips and his, demeanour being sort of like the happy-go-lucky, I think he needed the steerage of a strong woman, and Yoko was that. Was she the cause of the breakup? Possibly. I'm going to leave that one open to you. Musical direction. The Beatles shifted towards experimental and psychedelic music, particularly in their late albums, dividing fans who preferred their earlier music and more straightforward sound. I think there could be some controversy in that, but the Beatles were on a journey and they weren't going to stay as a rock and roll band forever and ever. And in fact, as the writing skills flourished, and that includes George, they moved into different directions. So I think it's only natural that their sound would change from their original rock and roll. Drug use. The band's experimentation with drugs such as LSD has been a topic of controversy with critics arguing that it influenced their musical negativity. Now, they were avant-garde, they were artists, and not only in the sort of sphere of music, but they had their toes in art, didn't they? The avant-garde movement. And I think they actually steered it. There's no denying that drugs played an influential part in their evolvement and development. And in fact, when you think of some of the songwriting that they created because of the drugs, I'm not sure that it produced negativity or musical negativity, so I think I might just poo-poo that idea. Songwriting credits. The allocation of songwriting credits, often attributed to Lennon and McCartney, have been a point of contention, with disputes over the actual contributions of each member. Lennon and McCartney started out as a songwriting duo, and they agreed that all their compositions should be credited as Lennon and McCartney. And I have a feeling that this kind of was born out of the idea of writing songs for other artists. I Want to Be a Man, the Rolling Stones. You had Mary Hopkin, you had Cilla Black singing their songs. There are just countless artists singing Lennon and McCartney compositions that they themselves didn't release. So the attribution of Lennon and McCartney as the songwriters had a force for itself, if that makes sense. It was like, it just seemed to be, they would get equal credits, they would get equal compensation monetary wise. Certainly when you get into the later realms of their songwriting, Yesterday, completely and utterly a McCartney song, but it's credited to Lennon and McCartney. And I think I did read that McCartney tried to get the writing credits for that song, having John's name removed from the credits. But you know, there you go. It's out there. The Abbey Road crossing. This was a funny one when I saw this. The iconic Abbey Road crossing, featured on the album cover, has become a source of controversy due to the dangers posed by fans reenacting the photo. I've been to London. I've sought out those locations. Link here. I think I might have even done 3 videos on that subject. And when you get to these places, you feel a sense of connection, and it's great. And I crossed the crossing. I didn't have anybody take a photograph of me, but I was looking both ways. I was watching for traffic. So I suppose controversially the crossing could be deemed, you know, as a point of contention. But all I will say is take care crossing those roads. They're busy out there. Plagiarism. The accusation that the Beatles plagiarized some of their early songs, particularly from American rock and roll artists, has sparked debate and controversy. They were influenced, there's no doubt about that. Buddy Holly, you know, and the country stars that I mentioned in my last video, Carl Perkins, Buck Owens. But they took those elements and made them their own. And there's nothing new in music. And if you're going to do a 12-bar rock and roll tune, short of changing the instrumentation, the structure will always be the same, and it's expected to be the same. Now, I know McCartney lifted the bass riff for I Saw Her Standing There from a Chuck Berry song, and he admitted that. But in terms of plagiarism, that kind of implies that they copied lyrics, and they copied structures, and they copied like guitar solos and everything. Well, they didn't. They created their own work, and they were influenced by other artists, but they spun their tunes and the styles in their own direction. Makes me often wonder about Neil Innes with the Ruttles. You know, that was parody, but he didn't have a right to the material because it was too much like the Beatles. So yeah, no plagiarism controversy from me, I don't think. George Harrison's songwriting contributions. Some fans and critics argue that George Harrison's songwriting talents were overshadowed by Lennon and McCartney, leading to a disparity in recognition. I think in the beginning George wasn't an accomplished writer, but he certainly did flourish. Certainly by the Help album, you know, with his contributions there. And then in his own right as the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be. And on the Let It Be documentary, he did say he had enough material for 20 albums. Was it 20 albums or he had 20 songs? He could certainly do 3 albums, couldn't he, straight away? And he did. All things must pass. 3 LP set. But yeah, I think he was overshadowed. And that's primarily due to the fact that the writing partnership of Lennon and McCartney was prolific. You know, they were churning out the tunes. There was no scope or room for Ringo or George to make kind of significant contributions. Yeah, that is a controversial point. Anti-establishment image. The Beatles' countercultural image and advocacy for peace caused controversy among conservative groups who viewed them as a threat to traditional values. Well, you know what? We thrive on change, but people are afraid of change. But the Beatles were steering a countercultural movement that was taking place in an awakening era. So, you know, post-war, through the 50s was kind of scratching at the itch that was the youth wanting their own identity. The 60s, it exploded, and the Beatles were right in the forefront of that. And I suspect who was threatened by the traditional values? You know, values change. You look at society now compared to the 70s and the 80s, and in fact you watch television and it'll show old series of comedy shows with a disclaimer saying the views and points are reflective of the period of time when these programs were created. Kind of makes me think, well, don't put them on television then, you know, because you're kind of still stirring things up. But yeah, you know, the Beatles were anti-establishment, but then all youth were anti-establishment, weren't they? Okay, the final point then, tax evasion. I wasn't really aware of this, and it could be controversial. The Beatles' involvement in controversial tax schemes, including the creation of Apple Corps, in an effort to avoid taxes. You know, it drew criticism and negative attention, but, you know, that's business. If you have a business and there are tax loopholes that say, rather than having a profit, spend the profit on other things, studio, buildings, equipment, then you reduce the profit, paying less tax. It's all legitimate business. That's what you do. So they set up Apple Corps. And, you know, when you think of tax man, and I mentioned this on my Skip Scotland Connections video, the tax rate was astronomical. Was it like 95%? So, you know, unless they were earning 10 million, they might earn, what's that, 95%? 9? I can't even do the math, and I'm a data analyst. They would be paying a lot of tax. So if there was a reason to not pay tax and do it legitimately, you know, they would do it. So I'll open this for discussion. You know, are there any other controversial points that you think should have been raised or can be raised? Maybe this will become my midweek Beatle soiree. And, you know, break my lunch breaks up in the midweek and throw out a mini video. Yeah, just some thoughts on controversy with the Beatles. I'm not sure many of them are controversial, to be quite honest. Is there any controversy with the Beatles? What do you think? Right, I'm getting back to work. I've got some more data analysis to do. Catch you in another video.